Welcome to the Pool Remodel Pros podcast. I'm your host, James Cawthorn, and every episode we dive deep into the world of pool design, renovation, and maintenance. Whether you're a pool owner, a contractor, or just someone dreaming of transforming your backyard oasis, you're in the right place. Each week, we will be bringing in industry experts to answer your questions, share insider tips, and keep you updated on everything you need to know to keep your pool in tip top shape. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Rick Specht from H2O Leak Pros, a true expert in the field of leak detection and plumbing solutions. Today, we'll be tackling a topic that's crucial for every pool owner. Rick, thank you for being here.
Pleasure.
So, today, our episode title is Pool Leaks and Plumbing Problems Solved, Expert Advice on Detecting and Fixing Issues. We'll be covering everything from spotting the early signs of a leak to understanding the tools and technology professionals use, and of course, when it's time to call in the expert. Let's dive in. Rick, you've been in the industry for a long time. How long you been doing this for now?
I started in the pool industry back in the late 80s.
And where'd you start at?
So started in Southern California, spent some time in Florida, and then for a number of years ran my own company up in Oregon.
So you've been all over the place then, all different types of weather too.
Correct.
That's awesome to hear. So what would you say is the importance of addressing, pool leaks and plumbing issues for, safety maintenance, cost savings, etc.?
Sure. So for pool leaks, homeowners typically focus on how much it's costing them to keep water in their pool, but really that's probably the smallest of the concerns. The bigger issue is really where that water is going and what additional damage it's causing. So pool leaks will always get worse and they will almost always cause more damage as time goes on and get more costly to make the repairs.
So the big question is, so for example, right now, my pool has a leak, or at least I think it does. I don't know. How can I tell if it is leaking? What's the number one way before, I go crazy about it?
Sure. So probably the easiest way is to put a mark on the tile. You can put a piece of tape, you can put a pencil mark on that or inside the skimmer, and then give it 24 hours and check the water loss. So the average is about quarter of an inch in 24 hours. Now there are a lot of varying factors to that: the ambient temperature, the humidity, any type of water features or aeration. Wind has a huge impact, but in general, it's 24 hours. So if you're losing dramatically more than that, you likely have a leak. Uh, People will also recommend doing a bucket test. There's some pretty clear directions on doing that. You can find that on the internet, and that's a pretty good guess in comparing water loss in your pool versus a bucket of the same temperature in same conditions. That'll give you a good idea as to whether it really is leaking or not.
So how often should a pool owner check for leaks? Just to like, is there like a schedule maintenance they should keep track of, or just to make sure things are running correctly?
So for a new homeowner, it's difficult because they don't know how often how often they add water to that pool. If they've owned a pool or been in that same home for some time, they have a pretty good idea as to how often they've always been adding water to that pool. And then all of a sudden, if it dramatically increases, that's a good indication that something else is going on. But one of the things that will hide that is an autofill. So autofills are great because people don't have to worry about keeping the proper level in a pool. If they go on vacation, they don't have to worry about it. They don't have to worry about accidentally leaving the hose on, filling the pool. However, they can mask leaks because they will constantly keep that pool filled. So if you have an autofill, there's a few different ways that you can determine whether you have a leak. First of all, your water bill is likely to go up. You may even get a notice from your water company. The other thing that will happen is, depending on whether the homeowner's taking care of the pool servicing themselves or a pool man, is what they're going to find is you're not going to be able to maintain salt, um, conditioner, or other types of chemicals in the pool because you're getting a constant dilution of the water.
And what can go wrong if this is just left as a leak? If you do have a leak, let's say you're like, hey, you know what? It's fine. I'm just gonna keep putting water in there.
Yeah, so it depends on where it's leaking, but typically, if you have for instance, a subterranean leak, a leak in the plumbing, a leak at the skimmer, As the water goes out, it's going to erode something, and eventually, typically, you will have more of a problem. So if you have a pinhole leak in a pipe underground and you let it go for long enough, eventually it's going to eat away at the soil. It's going to erode that. The weight of that pipe is going to push down it. Eventually, that pipe will snap, and now you have a bigger leak. You can also have catastrophic issues where, especially homes where they're on a hillside, you get a lot of water leaking. It eventually starts to move that hillside. You start to get deck settling and cracking. You can have structural issues. We've even seen pools where they basically hinge or start to crack and split. So it can go from a relatively minor repair to something rather catastrophic.
That's good stuff, Rick. You actually stole my next question. So that kind of leads in my next one. Are there certain types of pools? I'm a homeowner, I'm buying a new pool and I walk in the backyard. Are there certain types of pools that are more prone to leaks? For example, you have vinyl, above ground, fiberglass, concrete. There's so many different options out there.
Sure. Concrete or gunite or shotcrete pools will probably be have more opportunities to leak because you actually have more extrusions in them that can potentially leak. As far as that's the type of pool.
Yeah.
But where pools are more likely to leak is if you have, again, a hillside raised areas, you have more chance for soil movement. And anytime you get soil movement, you always increase the risk of something breaking or causing a leak at some point.
So speaking of the leaks, how do leaks typically form in plumbing versus the actual pool structure itself? I know you talked about movement on the hillside with the structure, and then you have the protrusions into the shell of the pool. There's a lot of different variables there, obviously.
Correct. So, from a plumbing standpoint, the weakest fitting of any, we're talking about PVC, we'll start with that.
Okay.
The weakest PVC fitting is always a 45. It's just the engineering, the design of a 45. Anytime there's any kind of torque or movement on that 45, they're very prone to cracking. You can crack a 90, you can't even crack a pipe, but it takes a lot more force to do that. If you have copper plumbing, there's still some pools out there with copper plumbing, much less likely to break. They will bend and flex. However, over the course of time, the copper plumbing will develop pinholes as it starts to corrode and break down. So they will leak in time, just in a different way. So PVC won't wear out, but it will break if any kind of pressure. Again, if soil has moved, if there's an erosion factor and weight is, it's no longer supported by soil, then eventually those fittings can break.
So it makes me think of a question right now. I get this a lot is, hey, there's copper plumbing in my house. It's been fine inside the house. Why is it not fine on the pool?
Sure. Well, if it's in your house, eventually it probably will leak.
Okay.
So take you back a little history of pools. So originally, pools were built with galvanized plumbing. The downside to galvanized is it would rust eventually. It would kind of close up as it got scaled up on the inside. So an inch and a half pipe would eventually be a half-inch pipe or a quarter-inch pipe. It would just close in, kind of like your arteries in the human body. So when they went to copper, it was a much better solution because that didn't happen. And then in the 80s, at some point, they actually went to PVC. Now, the reason they went to PVC away from copper was because of the cost of copper, just got too expensive. But what they didn't anticipate with copper was that copper is a relatively soft metal. So just water passing through it will slowly break that copper down. And when you find that people have slab leaks or plumbing leaks in their homes from copper, that's why. So eventually in their home, it will wear out. But now go back to the pool. Now you have a chemically treated pool. So much more aggressive water and much going to break down much faster than a typical supply line to a copper supply line to a house would be. So eventually the chemicals will break down that copper. It will erode it from the inside. Eventually will get thin enough to where it usually starts with pinholes, but eventually, you fix one pinhole and usually the next one is soon to follow. Eventually it's going to happen everywhere.
So basically, you're just chasing it the entire time.
Yeah, at some point you're spending more money fixing them than just to replumb the whole thing and eliminate all the copper.
So I know we talked about this before. is the water loss in the pool. Typically, we can lose 3/4 of an inch a day. When should I be concerned? I mean, when you see 2 inches a day, but then I know there's a lot of variables with that. Like,
Yeah.
when's it's like, "Hey, I got a problem."
So a quarter of an inch a day is the average in 24
Quarter inch,
hours.
got it.
That's kind of the average across the United States. But again, there are a number of varying factors. So if you've owned the home for a long time, owned the pool for a long time, you know how much you've typically added water. When it changes, you know you have an issue. And anytime you suspect a leak, it would be prudent to investigate that and find out whether you do or don't have a leak. The cost of a leak detection is far more reasonable than the potential for a catastrophic failure and much more expensive repairs down the road. Again, repairing it may be costly, but letting it go on for years is going to get much more expensive over the course of time because it's going to cause much more damage.
I know we talked about the evaporation can be a factor in that as well. I mean, is there any way to tell if it's just evaporation or if it's a leak?
Yeah, again, a bucket test. There are digital analyzers that can, within about 15 or 20 minutes, actually tell you. They'll compare the wind velocity at the time of the test, the ambient temperature, the water temperature. It factors all those things in and can pretty accurately determine how many gallons that pool's leaking or losing versus evaporation. So it can tell you whether it's leaking or not. A bucket test is a pretty good, it's not completely accurate, but gives you a pretty good idea as to what you're losing over evaporation. But again, any type of leak eventually is going to cause more problems. It's the sooner you catch it, the sooner you make that repair, the less it will cost you, and in the long run, it's going to be much more beneficial to long-term ownership of both the pool and the home.
So I know I've heard you tell this story before, and if you mind telling it again, the story of the famous pool by the beach.
Yeah, so we talked about the averages. So quarter of an inch in 24 hours is kind of typical. But in my company that I ran for a number of years, I had three leak detection guys. Very good, probably better than I was. They did it every day. But I sent all three of them out. They could not find a leak in a pool. It was leaking an inch a day. So I finally went out there and spent a day locating the leak. And in the end, what I found was uh, it was leaking, or I thought was leaking an inch a day. So more accurately, it was losing an inch a day. And what we found was, and we did a bucket test to prove it and to verify it, but because it was on a point in the beach, getting wind right across that pool all day long, the evaporation rate is an inch a day. So again, the point is a quarter of an inch is an average, but it can vary dramatically. And what affects water loss or evaporation more than anything else is, in fact, wind. So an unprotected pool, which this was, with a lot of wind, is going to lose much more water. But the same is true if you have waterfalls or spillovers or any type of aeration. Anytime you aerate water, you increase evaporation rate. So quarter of an inch is just kind of a generality. Every pool will vary depending on a number of factors. Aeration and wind is number one.
So let's say I was this homeowner. I did this test. I am losing an inch today. Is there any way to help minimize water loss from evaporation so I can try to save some money there as far as water goes?
Sure, there are a number of things. People will use solar blankets, the little floating solar blankets that will certainly reduce evaporation because you're uh, putting a barrier on the surface of the water. The downside to those bubble covers is they can be dangerous. So they are not a safety cover, and we've pulled more than one dead animal that's tried to walk across a bubble cover, and once they collapse and sink, nothing's going to get out. They can potentially be dangerous. There's also a product. A number of different manufacturers have it, but it's basically they refer to it as a liquid solar blanket. So the simplest way to describe it is it's a mix of isopropyl alcohol and a type of wax. And so basically, it puts a thin film of wax. The isopropyl alcohol keeps it in solution, covers the surface on the surface of the water. You can't see it, can't taste it, can't feel it. It's not as effective as a solar blanket, but it does reduce the evaporation rate. If you have a real safety cover that actually covers the pool, that's probably the best solution for evaporation.
Those are those automatic ones, right? That you can
Correct.
flip back and forth?
Costly, but that will truly it won't completely eliminate evaporation, but well into the upper 90 percentile.
Plus, it keeps the pool warmer too, as
Keeps
well.
well, for the same reason. So most of your heat loss comes from evaporation. So if you go look at a pool early in the morning, people look out at their pool and they see the steam coming off the pool, that's evaporation. It's also where all their heat is going.
That's definitely good to know. Next thing we got DIY or do it yourself leak detection versus hiring a professional. So I you have a lot of people in the industry as well as a lot of homeowners that, look up a lot of stuff on YouTube to do it yourself nowadays. Uh, for someone out there that, is looking for that, doesn't quite have the money or whatever reason it may be to not, call the professional, what would be, I think we talked about a little bit, we have the bucket test, kind of doing the marker. Is there anything else that we can do to kind of like check for a pool leak?
Yeah, so the easiest place for a homeowner to check, unless there's something obvious like a big crack in a pool that's likely to leak, that's something that they can visually see. If they look inside a skimmer, most skimmers, at least the modern skimmers, are going to be plastic. So they meet up with tile. There's usually a grout line there. So a lot of times the skimmer will move, and right there at the throat, there'll be a slight crack and can draw uh, water or leak water through that throat. So that's something they could actually take even like a food coloring, a dye, introduce it in near that throat with the pool off and see if it draws dye. But really, the most important thing a pool can do, other than a pool owner can do, is other than visually check everything, is to go look at the equipment. So, very common pool leaks, what we find is they're either at the pool equipment that they just nobody noticed. Sometimes you have to get down and look under the motor, under the pump to see if it might be leaking and nobody ever saw it. The other common issue that we still find is leaking through a backwash valve. So if it's a DE or a sand filter, it'll have a backwash valve, and at some point, if those fail, they will tend to drip and leak. And even a drip is amazing how much that can add up over the course of time. So you're not going to see that leak at the equipment typically. It will be over at a P trap somewhere else in the home. So you're going to have to go over and look while the equipment's on, see if any water is coming out of that backwash line into the P trap.
All right, so the major question. So I'm the DIY homeowner. I've done everything. I've checked the backwash lines, I've checked the motor, I've checked the skimmer, I've, swam around the pool with the food coloring. I've done the bucket test, I've done the marker, we've done everything. Is that the time where, hey, I still think I'm losing water? Do I call the expert?
Yeah, hire a professional because at that point you're going to spend a lot of time. You're going to get frustrated. It's unlikely you're going to find it. So, a good leak detection attack takes them about 5 to 7 years to really become experts. So, it's a very precise and precise science to find a leak, but it also takes a lot of experience, and there's a lot of things they have to check. So it's not something where you can show somebody how to do it and they're good in a month. It just doesn't happen. It takes a lot of time for someone to be good at finding a leak. So I wouldn't expect a homeowner or even a pool service professional that doesn't do it on a daily basis to really be an expert at it. There's just a lot to it.
So now that I'm gonna make the call, let's do this. What does a typical leak detection process look like? And then what type of tools and techniques do the professionals have to be able to do, have that 5 to 7 years experience over time?
Sure. So there's a lot of tools that are used. The basic tools that a professional leak detection company is going to use is, first of all, they're going to have the right equipment to pressure test all the plumbing. So all of the plumbing, all of the extrusions will have to be tested. So you put them under pressure with air or gas and to see if it holds pressure. If it holds pressure, you do not have a leak in the plumbing, even under a concrete deck or anywhere else. If you do have, if it does not hold pressure, you have a leak in one of those lines. At that point, when you introduce that gas under high pressure, it will come out of that crack or hole or broken pipe and make certain sounds. And so now you have to take a listening device to locate where that break in the line is. There are also cameras, underwater cameras that can be used to scope and look for breaks in pipes. breaks in lines. You also, leak detection company is going to end up always diving the pool because they're going to have to check all the extrusions, the skimmer, the light, the main drains, any pool returns, jet returns, an air bar, anything in there, any penetration through a shell, you have to check to make sure that it's sealed well and not leaking. Even if you know the plumbing is good, you still have to check that. A common place for a leak when it comes to checking it is lights. So pool lights, the cord, the conduit feeding where that light is. So the light is a sealed unit from the junction box where it gets power all the way to uh, the water line of the pool. But that conduit is a common source for it to leak. So that's another thing. They would actually have to remove that light to determine if that is in fact leaking.
And then do you have to drain the pool to do a leak detection test, or is it like, I guess, kind of a two-part question? Does it have to be drained? And then also, is there advantages with draining versus keeping water in the pool when doing a leak detection
Yeah.
test?
So you can't drain it. So
Okay.
we need water in a pool to determine. We could check the plumbing. We could pressure test plumbing with it empty, but we couldn't find what was going on with the extrusions because part of the test is when we get into a pool, we're actually using a special fluorescent dye, and when we introduce it around any extrusion through the shell, if there's a leak there, it's actually going to draw that dye out of that shell. So without water, we all we could do would be a visual and a pressure test. So you need water in the vessel before we could check it for a leak.
So we've gotten the leak detection done. We've gone through the whole process. We've found our leak. The tricky part is I can only imagine is, can we actually pinpoint where a repair is? I know you talked about the most common spots, could be the light, could be the skimmer, but let's say we know it's in a line that's running from the pool equipment to the skimmer, or or from the skimmer to a return, for example. Are you able to actually pinpoint where it's at, directly? And then I guess, can you explain that process of how you're able to pinpoint that exactly?
Sure. So typically, if we have a plumbing leak under the concrete or pavers, we can usually pinpoint that within about 12 inches. That's kind of the goal, to be within 12 inches
That's
of where
incredible.
it's leaking. Now, the way that's done, again, you're pressure testing or pressurizing that line. And when that pressurized air or gas is escaping from that break, it will make a certain sound. So we use specialized electronic hydrophones that will help us determine where, and even oftentimes we can't even tell what type of break in the line it is, but it will also help us to pinpoint where that is.
They'll sound better than your Dre Beats headphones that you buy from Best Buy, right?
Yeah, a little more specialized than that. Now, if we go back in history, there's still some companies doing this where they would literally drill holes in the concrete and drive a rod through there, and just once they found moisture, they would know that was where the leak was or close to where it was typically. Of course, that has some downfalls because uh, just because you get water at one location doesn't mean that's where it's coming from. Water can follow the path of where it was originally trenched for that plumbing. That number one. And second of all, you might end up with a dozen or more holes in your concrete deck now that you have to patch. So that's really kind of an ancient technology. So it can work, but not the best way, not the best approach of trying to identify or pinpoint a leak.
Plus, you'll leave the homeowner with a lot of holes in their deck when
A
you're
lot of
done.
holes that you can patch, but they see all these little holes where they drilled holes in the concrete. So not ideal.
So how much does repairs usually cost, depending on what you going with? I know we've covered a lot today, but what would be like an average repair before a homeowner, goes through this whole process so they kind of know what to expect?
So the repair can be very minor to where it can be done without even draining the pool. Oftentimes, if it's a plumbing leak, it can be from simply removing a little section of concrete and making a repair and doing a concrete patch, to if you have multiple leaks in a copper return line, the recommendation is always going to be just to replumb that pool. So that's going to be far more costly than something that you can do without even draining the pool. So the cost of the repairs really kind of runs the gamut. But a good leak detection company is not only going to give you the recommendation for repairs, they're also going to give you a pretty good estimate to know what to expect for the cost.
So I wanted to change gears a little bit here and kind of talk about the plumbing issues that you brought up. and also pressure issues. So a lot of times a homeowner or even myself with my own pool will go, "Hey, hey, this return is coming out like a spa jet," and then the other one just, is barely dribbling or not working at all. Is that common for pools or what's going on there?
Sure. So a couple different issues. So first of all, um, many pool builders, or some pool builders, maybe that's a better way of phrasing it. Some pool builders don't completely understand hydraulics. And so when you're plumbing a pool, you have to understand the hydraulics of the way water is going to flow. That's an important part of it. But just from a hydraulic standpoint, water is always going to follow the path of least resistance. So typically, everything else being equal, if the returns are all the same size, you're likely to get more pressure from the return closest to the pump versus the one furthest from the pump. So that's kind of typical. Now, there are ways around that to even that out better, but the short version of that is that's kind of the way hydraulics work. The most pressure will be in the return closest to where the water's coming from.
Is that something to worry about as a homeowner?
No, as long as you have enough water flow, you're not worried about how much pressure each return has. That's not the biggest issue. There are ways of balancing that out, but the bigger issue is just making sure you're getting enough water flow through the system.
How would you balance something like that out?
So part of it's the way that you plumb it initially and the
Yeah.
way you hydraulically balance it. But you can actually change the size of the returns and the eyeballs, and you can make those adjustments to force more water through another area. If you have, sometimes what will happen is when a pool is built, you'll have one return that's getting so little flow, you end up with a dead spot from a flow standpoint. And so you have to make adjustments in the other returns to accommodate that rather than having to replumb the pool.
Can I just put a monster pump on there and just blow it out?
Yeah, so a lot of people have done that, and some pool professionals have thought maybe that's the best way of doing it is oversizing the pump. But there's a couple problems. Again, hydraulically, it's just not a matter of horsepower. One of the issues is to put a bigger horsepower pump versus a smaller horsepower pump is not a big difference in price, but that's not necessarily beneficial to the homeowner. So what you're looking for is proper filtration and proper water flow. So you can get more water through a pipe and use substantially more electricity, so much less efficient, and you're moving water faster, but your filtration actually goes down, the efficiency of the filtration. So the slower you can move the water through the filter, it's actually much more efficient. So from a hydraulic standpoint, I would much rather see less gallons per minute flowing through a system running longer than the other way around. It will be much more efficient. You'll get better filtration in the pool. So just seeing the water, a lot of turbulence in the pool doesn't mean that it's filtering properly. Again, oversizing the pump is not a good solution.
It's like you're reading my script here, Rick, because you're kind of going to my next question. So, pool services, pool maintenance, DIYs, is it possible to help prevent any kind of future plumbing issues with regular pool maintenance and proper filter cleaning, for example?
Yeah, of course. So water chemistry is probably the number one issue with maintaining your pool. Pool professionals, that's why they're professionals. They typically understand water chemistry. And proper water chemistry, number one, is to make it healthy. Uh, if the water chemistry is improper, potentially it could become a health hazard. But number two is the longevity of all the equipment. So the pool plaster or pebble, the heater, the pump, the grout in the tile, all of those things can be affected adversely from improper water chemistry. So, water chemistry is number one.
Speaking of preventing, is there a way to help prevent leaks in the pool over time? Besides water chemistry, or is that kind of, number one, I guess what would be number two and three to help
Yeah.
with that?
So, depending on the type of leak, so obviously, if the water chemistry is not properly balanced, and that can be a challenge, depending on because there's a lot of factors. If a pool service comes by someone's home 3 times a week, that means 4 days a week something's happening that they can't control. But that being said, improper calcium levels, if the calcium level's way too low, it can actually start to draw calcium out of and weaken the calcium in plaster or pebble. So that can eventually cause issues. Low pH or alkalinity can damage. If you have copper plumbing, will certainly shorten the life of that. And same with the equipment. If you have improper water chemistry, can shorten the life or damage pool equipment.
Is there a regular maintenance that pool owners can do to keep the plumbing and systems in good condition? Like, is there some sort of like besides the water chemistry, like magic solution or, I don't know, flushing it out every once in a while?
No. So if it's copper, again, proper water chemistry is number one. Just making sure you're balancing. Um, there's something called the Langmuir saturation index, the LSI, which kind of helps you determine whether water is corrosive or not. So the LSI is very important, especially with copper plumbing. But if it's PVC, there's really nothing you can do to make it last longer or shorter. PVC is not going to wear out. Water chemistry really isn't going to affect it. What's going to happen is if you do end up with a pinhole leak or a crack in something, fixing it sooner rather than later will just prevent you from spending more money and causing more damage over time.
So we talked a lot about a significant amount about plumbing and leaks in the plumbing and different types of plumbing. The one thing I really want to touch on is structural issues, such as cracks. Um, you can have loose coping, tile falling off, those kind of structural issues where we've determined that the plumbing is good on this pool. What do we do as far as the cracks? Kind of take me through the process of like testing the crack because sometimes it could be a crack in the plaster, which could be the surface, or is it actual crack in the shell? How do we determine that?
Yeah. So if it's a crack in the shell, it will eventually reflect through in whatever the pool surface is, whether it's pebble or plaster. It's just inevitably going to reflect through, as with any concrete surface. And if the shell itself is not waterproof, whether it's gunite or shotcrete, it's actually the surface, the pebble or plaster surface on top that makes it waterproof. So if there is a crack, if it's not leaking currently, it likely will at some point. So if there's a structural crack and the coping, it may reflect what's going on, but it's not going to leak because it's above the water. But if it's in the tie line, it certainly can and may be leaking. So if that's the case, then we need to open up that crack and find out exactly what's going on underneath. If there is a crack and the longer it's let go, the more damage as water gets down in there, the more damage it's going to cause. Can cause damage both to the shell itself, the structure, as well as, again, eroding soil. So a structural crack is something serious that you want to address sooner rather than later. It's always going to get more expensive and cause much more damage as time goes on.
What would be process, I guess, from minimum cost to repairs for structural and then maximum, like, hey, Rick, I want to bulletproof this thing because I live on a hillside. I'm sick and tired of it. I've repaired this thing 3 times. So kind of, I guess, minimum, like, hey, I'm just patching this for now because I'm selling my home. And then maximum, we're like, hey, I don't want to come back and do this again.
So if we're not getting a lot of soil movement, if it's just a crack in there, um, then you can do an epoxy injection. So you have to cut it away, open that crack up, inject it with epoxy, and then patch that. If you've had more movement and you need to add some strength or rigidity to that, then they can add steel staples to that, which will give it a little bit more strength in holding that crack together. Now, if the whole backyard is sliding off of a hill, then that really needs to be addressed before addressing the pool because it's going to happen again. So no matter how many steel staples you put in there, you mentioned the word bulletproof. You can't bulletproof a pool if the soil it's sitting in is shifting and moving and sinking. So the shell can only be so strong. So you need to make sure that the soil is not moving. Conversely, as the pool leaks, it's going to cause that soil to move. So it is important. That's why you want to address those things sooner rather than later. The more damage it causes to the soil and the more movement you get, then the more other issues you're going to end up having to deal with. That's why it can potentially get far more expensive.
If I run into a pool or a homeowner has a pool that has structural cracks all over the pool, is there a solution such as I don't know, tying in more steel into the pool or kind of, are you able to steel the whole, steel staple the whole thing? Let's say it's not a hillside issue or it might be, we don't know, but looking for a different option.
So in that case, you really just have to inspect it and see what's going on there.
Got it.
So sometimes there's not enough steel in a pool. That can happen. Sometimes steel has to be added in certain portions of the pool. There are a number of different things that can be done to strengthen a pool, especially when there's deficiencies. But that would be based on what was discovered once that pool was drained and they inspected the cracks. So that would be kind of each case would be individual. What recommendations would be given would be based on what was found there and how that pool was constructed, whether there was an issue with the design and construction, or if it's something was out of their control. And that can't be determined until we open it up and look and see what's happening.
I've seen cracks on the steps and benches in a pool before, or like a spa, that little small step when you run into there. I haven't seen steel there, but I've seen it in a lot of pools before. Is that something that's common, or what? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So what is common, shouldn't be, but it is when they shoot the shell, they will often get what they refer to as rebound. So basically, it's the splattering of when they're shooting that pneumatically applied concrete. And so when it splatters, that rebound really is trash. It needs to be dumped. But sometimes a lazy nozzle man will try and use that and pack it back in as he's building an area up. Well, it's not as strong as that, and it doesn't adhere like what was shot from that high pressure nozzle. And so eventually that can break down and separate. And so sometimes you'll find cracks, and that's what it's from, is that rebound just doesn't have that adhesion that the rest of the shell does, and it will separate. And so sometimes you'll see that on step. So that was a lazy nozzle man that did it. At that point, when you discover that, that loose or degraded material has to be removed. You have to get to a solid substrate before you can rebuild it and patch it.
Oh, thanks, Rick. Thanks for answering that. So, more importantly, probably one of the most important things to do, so, is working with professionals. What should a homeowner, or any kind of serviceman out there look for when choosing a pool leak detection and, repair service for these type of structures, leaks, and plumbing repairs?
So a couple different things. Obviously, you want to make sure that they have some experience. You don't want someone who just bought a leak detection set up from a company online and said, "Now I'm a leak detection guy." So it takes years to get the experience. You also want a firm that has some experience in pool construction, understands how pools are and are supposed to be constructed, as well as understanding hydraulics, concrete, plumbing. All of those things relate to what we find in pool leaks. So determining and what you're looking at and understanding it is helpful in determining the best solutions for the leaks. The other thing is you want to make sure not only do they have experience, but also that they'll stand behind their work. So oftentimes, leak detections are higher. They come out, they find a leak, and they fix it. And then a month later, a homeowner or pool service professional says it's still leaking, and uh, they go back out and find a second leak, and then a third leak, and a fourth leak. So it's not terribly uncommon to find more than one leak. So ideally, you're going to find those leaks and stand behind not only what you found, but any repairs that were suggested. And some companies either don't have the experience or maybe don't have the resources sometimes to stand behind those things. You want to make sure that whoever you're either hiring or referring is somebody you can count on doing the job and doing the job correctly.
There's a lot of FAQs and common concerns, questions homeowners will have. What would you say are some of the most frequently asked questions homeowners have about pool leaks and plumbing that you've ran into over your years?
Well, oftentimes people wonder if a leak is a concern or if they have a pool leak. So if there's a suspicion of a pool leak, I always recommend let's verify it. Whether they do it and they can do some basic testing, like a bucket test. If they really think that there is a leak, hire a professional, get it found, make the repair. It's going to get more expensive and cause more damage if they let it go.
I guess, would that be something that homeowners will often overlook about pool leaks or plumbing issues? Like, what would you say is, besides that, maybe what's the big thing or a few big things people overlook?
Right. So they're afraid of the cost, understandable, but the cost is always going to be more if it gets worse. So nobody wants to pay for a leak detection. Nobody wants to pay for a leak repair. Uh, but as they let it go, it certainly can get more expensive. So it's one of those things where there's very few things in pools that we would refer to as emergencies. But a pool leak is really something that people want to address as soon as possible. They don't want to allow it to go on for a long period of time.
Can leaks in pools lead to health or safety issues?
Sure, for a couple reasons. Number one, if your pool is leaking, then your water chemistry is constantly being diluted. So it's impossible to keep a proper chemical balance if you can't keep the chemicals in the pool. So that's number one. From a safety issue, it's twofold. You can get it leaking enough to where now it's causing issues with conduit and electrical lines and systems around the pool. The other issue is it's leaking. What other structural issues is it going to uh, cause a problem for, not just to the pool structure, but even to the home? So the last thing anybody wants is for the back of the yard to slide off a hill and either damage somebody else's property or cause, catastrophic damage to their yard and trying to rebuild whatever has happened.
Rick, this is all great stuff. Again, I just want to thank you again for spending time with me today to kind of go through all this, share a lot of information. There's a lot of stuff to put in here and to consider, especially when they do have a leak. Try and find it out. Determine if you have a leak. If you suspect a leak, you can call your pool service. You can try to do a DIY kind of bucket test, check it yourself, do the marking. And then also after that, it's definitely good to call in the experts and do your research as far as what's required for that before things get worse. You got any closing remarks you want to leave our audience with today, Rick?
No, I think that's it. Thank you for the time. But the biggest thing is if you think you have a leak, don't put it off. Just try and go a little further and verify it. Again, the sooner you find these things, if it really is leaking, the sooner you address it, the safer your pool is going to be, and the less money you'll spend in the long run.
Thank you, everyone. And this closes our podcast for Pool Pros. Thank you.